So the fact that I will have to reenact this with dolls will just be traumatic. You know? I mean, because, it's essentially the same character, so I can just use the same dolls. It's fine.
That's great. And that's a good place for us to begin. Welcome to the Big Questions podcast, where we talk about love, death, sex, religion, and all the big questions worth asking. I'm your host, Robert K. Elder, and today we're talking with author Jen Lancaster, best known for her books, Bitter is the New Black and the Tao of Martha. Her latest book is called Twisted Sisters, and she's also our guest editor in Lake Forest. The Big Questions is sponsored by Shure, purveyors of professional microphones and headphones. You can check them out at shure.com. That's shure.com. The Big Questions is also part of the Sun-Times Media Podcast Network. Jen, welcome.
Thank you.
So, I'm going to just start off by the most obvious thing, because we're in October here, and 2 years ago you overcame your fear of Halloween.
I did.
And so you're in this place where you're constantly reinventing yourself.
I think that's fair.
Yeah, and I mean, I think that's been your MO. Like, outside of your novels, you live your life according to Martha Stewart's dictates and fashion sense and whatnot. I'm curious, how is Halloween different this year? And also, the bigger question is, you reinvent your life so much, what has stuck?
Different things have stuck from different books. In the Martha Stewart book, I had been terrified of Halloween my entire adult life. Loved it as a kid, but the minute I got out of college, there were little kids at my door demanding candy, which, number one, I couldn't afford, and number two, if I had candy, it would be mine. So I started to avoid Halloween, and then I think the first time I cashed a professional paycheck at a bank, the teller was dressed in a monkey suit. That does not build confidence in one's financial institution. So it bothered me. And then in the professional world on Halloween, people would try to wear their costumes to work. And I don't want to sit in a meeting and listen to Batman talk about his mission statement. So I really became anti-Halloween, to the point when my husband and I were particularly broke, which is what started my whole career. Right. We couldn't afford to leave or go to the movies like normal people could, so we would tape garbage bags on the windows, since we just had this little tiny living room right in the front of the house, and we would watch TV with headphones on so no one would know we were there. So part of the whole Martha Stewart thing is Halloween is kind of her Super Bowl. Mm-hmm. So we had to recognize Halloween. So I went all out. I did costumes. I decorated the house. I put glitter on pumpkins, which was the greatest thing to ever happen to me in my entire life.
And is it? Am I remembering this right? You call glitter the STD of the
it's the crafting. STD of the crafting world, because it never ever goes away. If you look in the floor, still there's glitter here from 2 years ago. So I went all out, and I bought, and this still makes me angry, I bought 200 full-size candy bars, because I wanted to be the house that kids came to and remembered 30 years later saying, oh my God, that one place gave us full-size Snickers bars. So I got all ready. I had everything set. I faced my fear of Halloween, and my husband and I sat in the dining room and drank wine on Halloween night, waiting for kids who never showed up. We didn't get one trick-or-treater, not one.
Let's be fair to those kids, because I tried to find your house, and not only did Google Maps was not helpful, but you have a little drive, like how are they going to make their way up?
I think kids are lazy. If they had taken the walk down the long drive, they would have gotten all the candy. Instead, I had 200 bars of candy left over in my house. And here's the thing, I'm not a thin girl. You can't leave me alone in the house with 200 candy bars. That's a bad thing.
But coming back, what is stuck? So how is this Halloween going to be different? And then, again, I want to revisit this question of what sticks from each of the books.
The Halloween I'm not really going to do this year. I'm on deadline for another book. I just rolled off deadline from the first book. I'm probably not going to do anything other than I painted a bunch of pumpkins downstairs.
That, yeah.
Aren't they? Those are fake pumpkins. Yeah. Those are plastic, and they're gorgeous. And I'm going to give some of them out at my event on Thursday, and I may put some of them in the shop where I have my furniture. But that's about it. But things that have stuck, when I did the book where I tried to culture up, I've become an opera fan. And every year now, my college roommate and I go to see 3 or 4 operas, which I never expected would happen. I have actually gotten back into fitness from Such a Pretty Fat, not because I'm trying to write a book about it, but because I thought maybe that's a better way to live my life. So some things have stuck. I mean, nothing has completely disappeared. but some things are just not as priority as others.
Yeah.
For example, when I was doing the Tao of Martha, my house was immaculate and perfect all the time.
And it looks awesome today.
Because I spent 7 hours cleaning it yesterday because it was tragic, and that's why I'm not having you go upstairs.
Okay.
So some things have stuck, and some things haven't stuck quite as hard.
Okay. Well, and you mentioned this a little bit before, but you're sort of an accidental author, if that's fair.
Absolutely.
Because you're a .com executive. The first .com bust happened, and you sort of reinvented yourself through a blog. Is that fair?
That is very fair. I didn't really have a ton of talent in the .com era. I graduated from college after 11 years, and I'm not a doctor or anything. It just, that's how long it took, with a degree in political science. And you know what? Nobody wants to hire someone with a C average in political science. So I got a job working for a healthcare company and doing data entry. But that was at the beginning of the .com era. So I was able to sort of leapfrog jobs and get a position that I wasn't qualified to hold and didn't really bring anything to the table. I thought I was great. I didn't know that I wasn't. I didn't know that there were kids out there with actual skills. So when I was laid off, it was a huge surprise. It was a shock. I didn't realize that first wave was over and that people weren't going to be lining up to hire me. So I went through all of these different emotions, first my arrogance, hubris, and then eventually acceptance, and I realized things aren't going to happen. So I began to write my frustrations down on a website, and it turns out a lot of people were in the same position, and I began to gain an audience, and people started saying, why don't you write a book? And I thought, will someone give me a check if I do that? Mm-hmm. So that's how it started. Becoming an author is the slowest get-rich-quick scheme anyone could ever come up with. Since I started thinking of myself as an author in 2003, and I didn't actually get my first check until, I think, late 2005. So I tempt for $12 an hour. And if you ever want good stories as a writer, go work for people who think you're invisible.
Yeah, it's rough. So Wendy McClure was just on this podcast as well, a friend of yours, fellow author, and she had sort of a similar trajectory. And the question I have for both of you is, what are the dangers of living your life in public, of having that public persona? Because, for example, you talk a lot about your husband, Fletcher, and at one point, he goes off antidepressants because you guys can't afford them.
Right.
So what are the trade-offs in living your life in public like that?
It's odd. And I've pulled him back. I've pulled his story back because as I've become a more established author, I realize the stories that I have to tell are mine. And he's great, and he's very normal. Everything's fine. But what's funny is he got this contract gig. He's doing project management consulting, and his boss was reading Bitter, and he said, "Wow, that's not awkward in any way, shape, or form." Yeah. So now. It's weird. And I've really pulled back from putting so much information about myself online, even though that's how my career started. Now with social media, people essentially come into my living room, my virtual living room, and tell me everything that is wrong with me. And that's painful. I don't like that. I know that there are other places for people to discuss things that they don't like about me, but please don't bring it to me, because I don't know what to do with that information. I had someone not... I don't know, maybe 6 months ago, I was getting ready for a furniture show since I started this whole line of refurbishing old furniture, just because it's something fun for me to do when I'm not writing. And I put up a picture of this footstool that I had redone. It was very cute. I painted it cream. There were frogs on it. And this reader said, the idle hobbies of the idle, and now I can't relate to you at all. And I thought, really, a footstool is what put you over the edge? I don't understand that.
Yeah, I think that's sort of tough, when even for men, when it's described, we love football. It's like, oh, so you like to watch other millionaires just throw around pigskin. I was like, well, okay, fine, but I don't think it's supposed to be relatable. It's just supposed to be entertaining. Right.
And that's what I try to do. I mean, a couple days ago on my website, I put up a picture of the pumpkins that I painted because I was really proud of them. And I said, hey, if the author thing doesn't work out, I could always have a career painting pumpkins. Mm-hmm. I'm not really going to have a career painting pumpkins. And someone wrote, well, after your last book, I'm not surprised. Ouch, that's hurtful. I read these. That's hurtful. And I was really proud of my last book. Some of my fans haven't been happy with me making the jump from nonfiction to fiction, but as I've done each book that's really a look at self-improvement, conflict is what's interesting, and I've really reduced the amount of conflict in my life, so there's not that much interesting happening. So I can't do a memoir every year because there's not that much that's memoirable.
Yeah, I was going to say, is that like expecting Bruce Springsteen to write about life on the streets and
he can't
bars?
write Thunder Road every year. He can't.
Well, it's just your life is different. It's
exactly.
Just, and
exactly.
Hopefully that's what happens to all of us as we lower the conflict and we become more thoughtful. Right. So the book that you just turned in is your bucket list book. What's the title?
It's called I Regret Nothing.
Okay, because again, you have the greatest titles
Thank you.
ever. In fact, I think in the industry there's something called like the Jen Lancaster title. Like I think people like I want to have a title because again, such great titles. So I Regret Nothing. So can you talk about a couple of the things you did?
Sure. It's a bucket list book, and there were some things that I really wanted to accomplish. I wanted to learn to ride a bicycle. I hadn't been on a bike since I was 12, and that seems just really shameful that I'm this age and I didn't know how to ride a bike. So my husband and I were off one day and we saw an old woman on a 3-wheeled bicycle, and I thought, oh, I need to get one of those. And my husband turned the other way because he didn't want me to see the woman on the 3-wheeled bike. He has some phobia. Like this is personal information, but he has a phobia about 3-wheeled bikes. And our rule has always been
very specific.
Yeah. Well, and he said they're not a 3-wheeled bicycle. They're adult tricycles. So his rule has always been, I have to be dead before you go tooling around on a 3-wheeled bicycle. So I thought that was dumb, so I simply bought one, and then I had a week to figure out how to tell him I'd bought a 3-wheeled bicycle because it was going to be him that had to put it together. So I started doing this research online, and I found this website on how to tell your partner you have herpes. So I just substituted 3-wheeled bicycle for herpes, and it worked out not as well as I thought. So I did learn to ride the 3-wheeled bicycle, and then I realized it was in fact shameful. The selling point was it works for the elderly, the handicapped, and the mentally incapacitated. I thought that's perfect for me. And it was great until I realized it weighed 1,000 pounds and I looked like a moron. So I graduated to 2 wheels. And I was really proud of myself finally for riding a bicycle, because that's something a ton of adults don't know how to do, and it's shameful to admit because you think it would be easy and it is not.
Rattle off just a couple other quick things that you did.
I learned to speak Italian somewhat, definitely enough to get around in Italy.
I remember how to swear in Italian, but go ahead.
I do too.
We can do this later.
Okay, I was going to tell you, my grandfather always used to swear at my grandmother in Italian. He would say, tu nonna è puttana del diavolo. And I always thought that was lovely, but he was saying, your grandmother's the whore of the devil. That's not nice. I mean, I didn't know that for years. What else did I do? I wanted to recreate a playlist. I've been listening to the same stupid music since 1982, and if I hear Take On Me one more time, something bad is going to happen.
It's now a club song, by the way.
Oh, and I love everything about the 80s and new wave, but I realized I was stuck there, so I decided to discover this entirely new playlist, and what I landed on was really early 90s hip-hop. And there is nothing in my life that relates to this struggle, but I love it so much. But I swear to you, I'm going to get arrested because every time I'm in the car with the top down, Eazy-E comes on in a school zone. I'm going to go on a list. Do you understand that? I'm going to go on a list.
Yes. NWA is again, listeners at home. Jen is in her lovely kitchen with pearls on. Not your average NWA listener.
No.
Public Enemy.
Yeah, and with Public Enemy, one of my friends is friendly with Chuck D, and I said, I feel like a poser. Is he going to be mad that I'm listening to his stuff? And she said he'd probably be pretty happy if I downloaded stuff on iTunes. So it's good.
Yeah,
it works.
You're fine. So in this struggle to write this bucket list book, which again just sounds a lot of fun, you have said before, and you mentioned it when we first started out here, that quote, I will die before I write a sex scene.
I will.
And so, why?
Because I'm modest. I have to spell things. And it's not like I don't think it's funny when other people do. I don't mind, although Game of Thrones is a little bit too naked for me. it's a little too rapey for my tastes. But I don't mind when other people do it. And when I listen to Eazy-E, he couldn't be more profane. It's just something that I have trouble doing. I don't know why.
That's not something that you want to tackle. Like, because I think maybe that's a whole book. Like, you just overcome your reluctance, because it seems to me that I mean, and again, I'm just quoting you again. You say, I'm not a prude. I just can't do anything romantic because that has a sexual element. Because now it would also allow you to go into the romantic space.
That's an interesting thought. I feel like I would perish. It would kill me. I can't. I think I think that's where the road ends. I do.
And is it? But what is it? Is it just something about your upbringing, or is it something about your own like sexual education? What is it that makes that, in a like vast career of all these subjects, your kryptonite?
I don't know. I mean, I was a drunken sorority girl who spent 11 years in college. I am not unfamiliar. So I don't know what happened. Just as I got older, I think I've become more and more conservative. Good, bad, or indifferent.
Sure.
I mean, like right now, my V-neck ends right, mid, pretty hard.
Collarbone.
Right at collarbone. This is as much cleavage as I'm showing. It's just not who I am. And I think it's funny. I think actually people appreciate reading something that's not graphic.
But is it reflective of your, personal philosophy, or is it protective of that personal philosophy? So like, hey, I have a satisfying carnal life, so I'm going to protect it. Or not even Fletch is going to have this conversation with me.
Oh, I really don't even have these conversations with Fletch anymore. I mean, honest to God, the first night that I met him, he stayed over at my house. And one of the reasons that I decided he should be my boyfriend is, number one, he moved an air conditioner for me the next morning, which was terrific. And then he came to my house with actual tools to build shelves. And if I hadn't been vaguely easy, I don't know that we would have hooked up. And I'm not embarrassed about that, but to actually write the scene, I would die. I would die.
But does it involve a tool belt?
Oh, God, no. Jesus, God, no.
Now, one of the things that this career has allowed you to do, as you mentioned, go into novels and have time traveling, hair rock obsessed girls. What is next? Because like I'm trying, it's impossible to sort of find a genre that you fit into comfortably. Like,
well, I'm still trying. Honestly, I'm still trying to find my footing in fiction. I love writing fiction so much. What I did wrong with my first novel, and I know this now. I tried to make the characters too much like Fletch and I, and there was too much that was happening in my life that was similar. For example, Fletch and I were buying our first house, and one of the reasons I wanted to buy in Lake Forest is John Hughes has been an idol since the 80s, and I wanted to live in the same space that made him so creative. I wanted to see the same things that inspired him, even though he had already passed away when we bought this house. So as part of the process of buying a house, my husband and I, since this is the first house we ever bought, my husband and I spent 2 years watching HGTV, trying to figure out how to do everything right. So when we bought our house, it had a lot of really unfortunate wallpaper, but it had strong bones. It inspected beautifully. So we bought our house, and there was no drama. There was no story. But while we were shopping, Cameron's house from Ferris Bueller's Day Off was on the market. And if we changed things and stretched things around, both of us got, third jobs, we could have swung that house. We could have done it. Even though everything about that house was wrong for us, it was dated, it was on a hill, the dogs would go tumbling down the ravine, everything was wrong. And I said, I can't even set foot in this house because I will buy it because of the John Hughes connection. So that made me think, what would happen if someone purchased a home based on an emotional decision? So I came up with these characters who were very similar to my husband and me, Mia and Mac. She was a writer, and they ended up buying Jake Ryan's house from 16 Candles. Now, in real life, that is a $6 million home that I'm not even allowed to drive by. And it's perfect and it's immaculate, but in the book, it's not. So they bought this house, and it turned into the money pit, and they almost lose their marriage rehabbing this house. And it was such fun to write. While I was writing it, I had painters here every day who were doing a beautiful job stripping my wallpaper and not stealing any of my things. But in the book, everything goes wrong. Her contractor runs off to fight a civil war in Kyrgyzstan. Did I say that right? Ish.
Yes.
Sure.
Yes.
So while these terrible things are happening to the characters, my life was fine, but because I didn't do a good enough job differentiating between them and me, it just confused all my readers. And it wasn't until I read Bethany Frankel's first novel, Skinny Dipping, where she fights with this Martha Stewart type character, that I realized how frustrating it is not to have the true story. And there are still people who think that I bought a John Hughes house and that all of this stuff happened to me, to the point that people were emailing me saying, "Why are you calling yourself Mia now?" That was my failing. I did that wrong. So I decided to do the next book, completely different, with magical realism. And Here I Go Again is about Lissy Rioter, high school mean girl, who basically time travels to right all the wrongs so she can have a good life. I don't think anyone thinks that's real. I don't know, though.
But you've played exactly into my hand, and that is,
good.
I want to ask, what would you time travel to change?
I
know that character's not you, but I think that's an interesting journey.
Honest to God, I would have worked harder in college, and I would have taken a little bit less time there, because it was hard getting started after school. And I just, if I had known how easy college was compared to real life, I think I would have taken a lot more advantage of that. I don't know that I would have ended up here, but if I could do something, that's an area where I know that I slacked. And now I'm such a hyperachiever that it bothers me that I was so lackadaisical at one point.
Is there anything personally though, like relationships you would fix, or like insights you have now that would have made you act differently?
I think I would have been a better friend to my girlfriends in college and wouldn't have always been trying to steal their boyfriend.
Yeah.
I think that
11 years is a long time to steal boyfriends.
It is.
So.
It's a really long time. And there are a lot of people now at Purdue that don't like me. And I think when they see me fat in the alumni newsletter, they're not unhappy.
One of the things you mentioned is as you've gotten older, you've gotten more conservative. And you've talked about in interviews just being conservative and how sometimes that's not a detriment, but it's different than the expectation. What do you think that is?
I don't think that people understand that conservatives can actually believe in gay marriage. It's a difference between being conservative fiscally and socially conservative. So all the things that everyone wants, I want too. I just don't really want to pay for it. And the thing with my politics is I never write about them because I don't want to write things that tear people apart. I want to write things that bring people together. And if you even mention you vote a certain way, that turns off half the audience. And I don't want that because I don't write about why I think my views work.
But also it's part of that expectation when people find out that you're conservative is that you're so funny. Like this is the weird thing that I think you find a lot in sort of like comedy research and whatnot is comedy is often speaking truth to power and lifting up the disenfranchised. And I think there's actually like an Onion article about why conservatives can't be funny. So you've obviously proven that wrong, but what is wrong about that perception?
I think a lot of conservatives aren't funny. I mean, that's the thing. I think a lot of them take themselves way too seriously. And when you're drinking your own Kool-Aid, it's hard to have a sense of humor about yourself. Yeah. I think more than anything, I have a sense of humor about myself, and I happen to be conservative. And I know that sometimes that's just funny. I don't think Ann Coulter is funny.
Yeah.
I don't think that she has a sense of humor about herself, and she should.
Yeah. So is that one of your, I don't know, greatest weapons in your arsenal, is that you're self-deprecating? I
think so. And I think that being able to use humor is a way to get people to listen to you. People have asked me, again and again, will you ever do a political type book like P.J. O'Rourke or Christopher Buckley? Probably not. I don't think I'm that smart. Honestly, I don't think I'm smart enough to actually convince anyone of anything.
But again, they're even in that realm you're talking about, like that's a rarefied group, folks who are able to sort of be funny and political. But I think even people who disagree with P.J. O'Rourke find him funny because it's that National Lampoon background, that sense of timing, that sort of thing as well.
Like Dennis Miller, I think he's genius. But when we watch him, we have to pause and go back because we don't get everything on the first go round.
But Dennis Miller, I'd like to listen to him on like the WTF podcast or whatnot, because he took a literal right turn at some point. I think
after 9/11.
After 9/11, and just was not funny. Like, that was part of the problem. Like, George Carlin took a similar turn, and it became less even social commentary and more therapy. And it's really interesting because I was the world's biggest Dennis Miller fan. The Off-White album, I think, is a comedy classic. But he's sort of like on AM radio, and he's taken this weird space. So I guess I'm asking, is Dennis Miller funny? I want him desperately to be funny.
I think he's funny.
Okay.
I think he's funny, but he absolutely has a message in everything he says, and I think that maybe with him, if you're not on board with the message, it's just not funny. Like, I think Jon Stewart is hilarious.
Yeah.
I think The Daily Show is brilliant. It doesn't necessarily coincide with my way of thinking, but I can appreciate it. Yeah. And I don't think a lot of conservatives can appreciate what is funny about us. Yeah. You know?
So, Jen, the last thing I want to explore is, you've built half a career reinventing yourself. I'm in your lovely home.
Clean today.
You've written a bucket list book. What is left to reinvent?
I don't know that I have a lot to reinvent about myself, so I think anything going forward will be more participatory journalism, and I really want to do a book about travel. I think that would be a lot of fun. My husband and I have never traveled before. I mean, we were so broke for so long in our marriage that travel wasn't even an idea, and it's only recently that we started to travel, and we've been together for 20 years. Specifically traveling to foreign countries. We went to Italy over the summer, and later in the fall we're going to go to London. And each time we both learned so much about ourselves and so much about our relationship and things that we liked and didn't like. So now I want to do more travel experiences, maybe more of the unpleasant kind, because I think that would be hilarious, and I don't want to do like going and making fun of all their cultures, but more making fun of me not knowing how to do things in other cultures.
Jen, I think that's a perfect place to end. Thank you so much. You have been listening to the Big Questions podcast, part of the Sun Times Media Podcast Network. Our music is by